All right, fans, welcome to another edition of our Ranking the Albums. And today, definitely a tough catalog to kind of rank through for various reasons. 10 album catalog for none other than Def Leppard. And to help me rank them, we've got a special guest here, Mr. Christopher P. Hilton here from the book, the author from The Spectacular Rise, Fall, Rebirth of Hair Metal, an Era Not to Be Forgotten. Welcome again.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much. Excited to do this.
All right. Well, so Def Leppard, what a career these guys have had.
Yeah,
Um,
I've done a lot of these worst to first lists, and some of them are very easy when you think about the worst side of it. I've done these for Motley Crue and Poison and Warrant, for example, and at least for me, it's very easy to quick pop off Generation Swine and Holly Weird and Belly to Belly, and then work to their better stuff. And I'm sorry if I offended anyone with that, but when I thought about Def Leppard, worst to first is a tough categorization. It's almost like you have to do it least favorite to most favorite because I'm not sure Def Leppard has a bad album, at least in my view. Some are better than others. They don't have really a bad album, and it's a big catalog, but they do have some very polarizing albums. Hysteria for some people abandoned the new wave of British heavy metal, which it did. They had an alternative sounding album. They had a pop sounding album in the early 2000s. So I think you get quite a wide range of spectrums depending on who you ask. So it should be a good time.
definitely, definitely. All right, so we're gonna real quick. I'm gonna run down the list of Def Leppard here. Five platinum albums. These are all the studio albums we're talking about. Two gold albums, so that's 7 out of their 10 have at least got certification here. 15 top 40 songs and four top 10 songs. So that's pretty impressive, considering they weren't from the United States. So, that's definitely a cool thing to have for them. Um, so we start off, we're only going to be ranking just the studio albums, and we're kind of not counting retroactive because that's more like a compilation. And same with the covers albums. We don't really consider those actual studio albums because they didn't even write any of the songs there. So we're just going to count the 10 albums, starting off with On Through the Night, obviously, from that album all the way up and through the final Def Leppard album as it stands right now, which is the 2015 self-titled album. And since you are our guest, I'm going to let you start off with what you feel is your number 10 album there
Okay.
from Def Leppard.
All right. Well, I'm going with the very first one. I'm going with On Through the Night. I know that is sacrilegious to folks that are very into the new wave of British heavy metal, Def Leppard. So I apologize in advance for all my crazy opinions. I don't think On Through the Night is a bad album. I really don't. I think just viewed against the rest of their catalog, it's not necessarily the first Def Leppard album I reach for. The guys were just obscenely young. I think Rick Allen was only 16 years old at the time. They were rushed into the studio. They took the 9 songs they had in their live set. They wrote a couple new tracks, and the whole thing was done in 3 weeks. I think Joe Elliott only got like 2 days to work on his vocals because they spent all the time on the guitars. And in some places, candidly, it sounds like it. I think the key word with this album was potential. There was a lot of things here that the band would build upon later. It was a little bit of an unfocused album, which you would expect necessary at the time. Of course, they would get that focus in spades later on, but I think it planted the seeds of what the band would become. Certainly, I recommend the album to anybody, if not just for the riff to "Waste It" alone. Right? What a classic riff! One of the greatest riffs to come out of the era. But like I said, if I have to go least favorite to most favorite, I started with On Through the Night. So I apologize. Some of your viewers probably already turned off the channel. I've offended them now. What about you? What's on your end of the spectrum?
All right. Well, for me, the 10th, the number 10 for me is actually Songs from the Sparkle Lounge. And kind of like you said, it's not that it's a bad album. It's just not as strong, in my opinion, as some of the other Def Leppard's albums. But it definitely, like, my bottom three kind of were like all around each other. I feel maybe just one song in there was a little bit better that kind of helped push the album over the edge here for me. So for this album, obviously, I felt I'm going to list. I was starting a new thing here. I'm going to list my favorite song from the album as well as my favorite deep cut. And for my favorite album, my favorite song, or what I feel was the best song, I feel was "Come On, Come On." And my deep cut for that album would be "Bad Actress." Really love that song. Saw these guys on this tour; they were great, as always in concert. This album, obviously, this was one of their second most recent studio album, and it didn't certify at all, but it did make number 5 on the U.S. charts. So not too bad for 2008.
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting. I had Songs in the Sparkle Lounge as my number 9, and I almost had it as my number 10. And I've actually said before that that's probably my least favorite, so I may be a little inconsistent there. I thought I had some good stuff as well. When I make my Def Leppard playlists, the one song I usually put on there from that album is "Come On, Come On." So we're in the same boat there. I think that's just an insanely catchy 70s T-Rex Slade Sweet vibe that they hit there. Some of their heroes. But the album was just a little too inconsistent for me. It had all these different kinds of styles on it. They opened with the really grungy kind of "Go" song that would have fit on Slang, and then they went right into uh, what was the next song? Was it Nine Lives?
Uh,
Yeah, that was it.
yeah,
It was Nine
Nine
Lives.
Lives.
And,
Yeah,
that would have fit more on Euphoria, but of course I was turned off that they had the country verses on there,
exactly.
because I'm that way. Then they had the 70s sounding song, and it was just a little over the map. I thought there was some good stuff on there. I'm sorry, I forgot you mentioned, a favorite and a deep cut. If I had to pick it, deep cuts are tough from the later years albums because, there's not a lot of things that charted as singles. But I thought the ballad, the Queen inspired ballad "Love,"
Yeah.
was really good. I'm not a huge power ballad kind of guy, but I thought that was a really well written song. But I very rarely reach for songs from the Sparkle Lounge when I'm in a Def Leppard mood.
Yeah. I mean, neither. Yeah, that album. I'll play it from time to time, but that's why it's number 10 for me, number 9 for you. So we can get
Yep.
down to number 9. So for my number 9, I'm reaching for Slang.
Okay.
Um, so Slang, which obviously came out in 1996, was actually, considering the time, very impressive. It reached number 14, and it made gold. That's saying a lot considering what was going on at that time, as we both know. And the direction the band took on the album. It was like a totally left turn out of nowhere. Boom, let's do it. So kind of surprising there that they went as far left as they did. But overall though, that album I'm going with. All I Want Is Everything is the song that I like the best, and Blood Runs Cold is my deep cut, and honorable a song that a lot of people don't really know that they should, and I know Joe Elliott was actually quoted, I guess, as saying that they should have put this song on the album that it was recorded for, and that was "Move With Me Slowly," a great song that don't know why, maybe because it just didn't fit with the rest of them, but it really stands out. What a great song that is.
Yeah, Joe Elliott said it was actually his favorite song from the album. Ironic that it didn't make the album, but I love that song too. If your listeners don't think I'm crazy yet, they're gonna, because I had actually Slang as sitting down. I had it as number 4 on my list, which is going to be very, very rare for any Def Leppard fan. But I actually really liked the album. Now, that's not to say when it came out, I wasn't shocked and a little disappointed because what I wanted to hear was Hysteria Part 2 or Pyromania Part 2. But I really liked it for what it was. Joe Elliott was quoted as saying, "Hey, we could not have put another Adrenalize out in 1996. Right? We would have got laughed off the stage," and that was just a sign of the times. Um, but you're right; it was a complete left turn in terms of style of music. But the band also said, they were completely burnt out on the formula they were doing. Right? Pyromania, Hysteria, Adrenalize, all these huge, big, bombastic sounding, intensely produced records. For them, they needed a change. They needed a change, or they couldn't move forward. Joe Elliott has also said that if the band hadn't made Slang at the time, they couldn't have gone on. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. But if you take it for what it is, which is a different style of music, I think it's fantastic. And I'm not a grunge and alternative fan. I'm really not. But songs like Truth or Turn to Dust, these are very powerful songs. And of course, it's Def Leppard, right? So the production again is immaculate, and it's still big sounding, even though it's very organic and stripped back for them. And again, I'm not really a power ballad guy, but I loved the ballads on that album because they weren't the traditional power ballad, soft, syrupy template. You mentioned what Blood Runs Cold, and over there was Where Does Love Go When It Dies, I think. And let me quick check my note here so I remember the other on the spot. Uh, oh, Breathe a Sigh, All I Want Is Everything, Blood Runs Cold, and Where to Love to Go When It Dies. And that's a lot of ballads for one album. I generally prefer just one, but I thought these were all really well written songs. So I'm a strange case here, right? I really like the Slang album. Now again, when I think of Def Leppard, I don't think of that type of song, but I love to just take that apart. It's the black sheep of their catalog, much like Motley Crue's 1994 album. I think it's a really unique, excellent snapshot in time. So Slang for me was number 4. So we're
Okay.
crazy already.
All right, what are you gonna go for your number 8?
Okay, number 8. Let's see, make sure I don't mess up my list here. What about I had the 10 album, the X album. And again, we talked about, left turns and departures. This is probably another one. Coming off of Euphoria, I was happy that Def Leppard was kind of getting back to their roots. Now, not their new wave of British heavy metal roots, but their late 80s pop metal roots. And when I heard X, I was disappointed at first, right? Because this is a pop album, no more, no less. This is not a heavy metal, a hard rock, or even a pop metal album. It's a pop album, which is not what I was looking for from Def Leppard. But if you're looking for a good pop album, it's a fine record. They're well-written songs. And again, it's always just Def Leppard, right? So you've got very talented musicians. You've got wonderful performances. You've got, again, impeccable production. So, if you're looking for something a little lighter with just well-written songs, I think it's terrific. But again, when I think about Def Leppard, it's something I don't often reach for. Um, Album was also a little controversial because, it had, for the first time, it had songs on it that weren't written by anybody in the band. And of course, here we go with the ballads again. And unlike the ballads on Slang, which I thought were really fantastic songs, I was not a huge fan of songs like Unbelievable or Long, Long Way to Go. They were just a little too, syrupy for me. I mean, they're good songs, but it's not something that I want to rock out to for sure. But there was some good stuff on it, but it's in the back half of my list for sure. So number 8 for me is the X album.
So what's your best song and then your deep cut that you would go with?
Oh yeah. Um, I like Now the best when I make my Def Leppard playlist. It usually always has just one song from X, which is Now. As far as the deep cut, as simplistic 3-chord generic rock as it is, I like 4-letter word. Right? This was really the only song on the album that was you might say is a rock song, and sometimes the simpler songs are much easier to write, but it was a catchy tune, right? And it was a nice break from the more pop-oriented stuff on the record.
Okay. Well, for me, that album turned out to be my number 6, and we picked the same exact songs, Now and 4-letter word.
Really?
And it's cool because I think those are two of the songs that they actually played during that tour in concert, so that worked out quite well there. Did you get to see that tour?
Of course.
Okay.
I think up until that point, I had seen Def Leppard on every single tour post Pyromania. Always just a fantastic show, right? I mean, these are highly talented musicians for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, when I went through this ranking, I'm looking at X and I'm going, I never really gave this album much of a listen other than those two songs, and I was really starting to really enjoy it when I was listening to it, which is kind of weird because I never really I guess I just never had gotten to absorb much of it before. But yeah, it's definitely, that's probably why it's up to number 6 for me, and so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get it, if you can get past the fact that you're not going to hear Rock of Ages, right? Songs like, You're So Beautiful or Torn to Shreds, these are well-written songs. These are catchy, good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, so let's see. You did. I'm going to go back to my number 8 now. That's because mine was different than yours. Mine was Euphoria, which kind of was like the comeback off of Slang, the follow-up there. I think the thing that really helped bring them back at that point in time was the lead single, "Promises." That was the one that kind of definitely reminds you back from the earlier days. Catchy, probably the catchiest song they have written, pretty much since that time frame. Since the grunge era. And oddly enough, they don't play it live that much, just surprisingly. It's such a great song, though. And I picked Demolition Man as my deep cut. That's the one that opens up the album. I believe they opened up that tour with that song as well.
Yep.
Um, yeah, because I saw that one in Syracuse, so I remember that one there. Euphoria kind of is probably the way you feel about X. To me, it's too sugary, too pop in a lot of ways, especially once you get past the first couple songs. It just doesn't. It just seems too overproduced for me, for my liking. I liked it to be a little bit raw, um, but it has the similarities, from X in some aspects on some of the songs.
Oh
To,
yeah,
to me,
yeah. So we're kind of in lockstep here. We didn't plan this, folks, but Euphoria was my number seven. So we're right in the same place there. And this was the comeback album, right? In terms of getting away from Slang and getting something that sounded pretty much almost exactly like Adrenalize, both in production and songwriting. And yeah, Promises was the song. I think that's one of the best songs Def Leppard's ever done. It's in their top 10 for me. And amazingly enough, it went to number one, if I remember right, on the US mainstream rock chart, which was ridiculous, for a band of their inkling at the time. But when you think about this album, I think you're right. I think it was more, Adrenalize light. There's some really good stuff on it, but there's some also X-based pop stuff on it. Um, I think the band knew that at that point in time, no one was looking for Slang Part Two, right? They had to kind of get back to the things that, at least not their real roots, but back to the stuff that sold them all the records in the late '80s. And Promises was in that Photograph type of mold. Um, I thought there was other good stuff on the album as well. You talk about favorite song, of course, is Promises. But if I had to pick a deep cut, just to not be repetitive, because I was probably going to pick Demolition Man, I would go with Back in Your Face, right? Back in Your Face is this silly, again, 70s Slade-like T-Rex type of song, but it was enjoyable, right? It was fun, it was kitschy, and it was kind of what you were looking for from Def Leppard at that point in time when people were looking to rekindle some of the 80s nostalgia, right? They didn't necessarily need something super serious. And so Back in Your Face fit the mold. But that album did quite well, right? It went all the way to number 11, 10 or 11 on the Billboard chart, don't remember exactly which, and gave them their first charting song, to your point, Promises, all the way back since 92. Probably the last charting song in 92 was Stand Up, Kick Love into Motion. So
yep.
it was the right thing for them to do at the time. And it's got some good stuff that'll make the playlist, but it's not going to show up on my top half, much like yourself.
Yeah, and another note of Euphoria is the last studio album to get certified, as it did reach gold.
Yep.
And like you said, number 11 on the charts is where it reached. All right, so number seven, that was for you. My number seven um, is actually the self-titled Def Leppard album, which came out
Oh,
2015. This album, when I first came out, I really loved it because it seemed like it was great to hear just because at the time there wasn't a lot of good stuff out there. So when I first heard it, I loved it. But then I kind of like, when you got 3,000 CDs to listen to, it's, you can't listen to them all, unfortunately. So I kind of left that one to go. But, pulling this out the other day to listen to it, I'm thinking, man, a lot of good stuff still on here. This is one of those albums that definitely I'll appreciate it as we go on in time. I'll appreciate it more. And what I reach got for me is Let's Go. Obviously, that's the one that really takes you back to the Mutt Lang days there. You can hear the production, and definitely, it actually sounds like it could have been on Adrenalize, that song. Um, and All Time High, I picked as the deep cut.
yeah, high energy rocker there.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
the self-titled album for me was actually a little higher. It was number five, and I was flipping back and forth between five or six, but I put it at number five. I think it's an amazing album. It is everything you think Def Leppard could be in 2015. Some really amazing songwriting, probably the best songwriting that they had since maybe even Hysteria, in terms of just consistent quality. And it's too bad because not a lot of people, not a lot of fans from the 80s know about this album, and they should, right? If you liked Def Leppard in the late 80s, you'll like this self-titled album from 2015. And it kind of had, at least the way I viewed it, maybe a song from every era. To your point, Let's Go was very pour some sugar on me ish.
Mhm.
Uh, Dangerous. It sounded a lot like Photograph, maybe a little too much like Photograph if you go back and listen to it. Um, All Time High, again, you mentioned it was an energetic type of song. There was the Queen. I always have a Queen inspired song. Man Enough was pretty cool. Battle on My Own was kind of like had a Zeppelin type of groove. And Wings of an Angel, a heavier, darker type of song, sounded like it could have fit right next to Foolin' on Pyromania. And so there was a lot of variation in it, but unlike, Sparkle Lounge album had a lot of variations that I just didn't think fit together. I think all the variation in the self-titled album fits well together and the songs flow very well. And of course, again, the production is fantastic. The performances are good. Joe's voice is in fine shape for 2015. I was really, really impressed with it when it came out. Admittedly, I listened to it a lot at that time, and I haven't reached back for it as much as I should. But I flip flop between 5 and 6. But when I look at just the consistency of the work, I think it's one of their best records. It's hard to believe.
Yeah. All right. So that was number 5 for you. What was your number 6?
My number 6 was Adrenalize. And again, I kept
Okay.
flip flopping this back and forth between 5 and 6. I loved Adrenalize when it came out because I don't know, I think I was 16 years old or something. And if you're 16 years old and one of your favorite bands comes out with a record, you love it.
Yeah.
Of course, it was all over the radio. And this was really the last of the very big blockbuster hair metal albums. Now, again, we all know Def Leppard is not a hair metal band. We talked about that in a different segment. But the last of the big records from that genre of music to get any substantial commercial success. It just beat the ticking clock that was grunge. But in a lot of ways, for me, it was Hysteria light. I mentioned that with another record. It took off right where Hysteria had left off, but it was more of a straightforward kind of pop rock album, right? It didn't have all these layers and different types of sounding songs that Hysteria had, and lacked some of the adventure and diversity that Hysteria boasted. And of course, God bless his soul, Steve Clark was missing now, right? And he was a big part of the band. A lot of people will tell you that, Def Leppard died when Steve Clark died. And I think they're not wrong. They're really
Right.
not wrong, but the band was burnt out. They were exhausted. They coming off Pyromania and Hysteria. They had lost Steve Clark. Mutt Lange wasn't around to produce. They, co-produced this record themselves. And I think it was amazing for what it was, because it's not the first time that Def Leppard has produced an album under duress and under difficult circumstances. We know this, but they got it done, right? And it was a big hit, right? And it launched a huge tour, and it sold millions of records. But I don't think there's a lot of the songs are, I don't know how to say it. Like Let's Get Rock was the big single, right? Well, actually, the ballad, Have You Ever Needed Someone So Bad, was the big signal, which I thought was a pretty generic ballad. But Let's Get Rocked, that's a fun, catchy song. But at the risk of offending people, I often call that song like Def Leppard's Unskinny Bop, which if Def Leppard's listening, I'm sure they're not, they would get really mad. So I apologize. But some of it was just intended to be fun stuff. I think that was actually the last song written for the record, because they had wrote White Lightning, of course, for Steve Clark, which is a very emotional, in-depth song. And they said they were so burnt out and exhausted after doing it, they needed just something ridiculous. And so Let's Get Rock was born, and commercially that was a good thing. So it's now my loved at the time, but I just think it's not, hasn't held up as well for me as other Def Leppard albums.
Yeah, I see your point on that. For me, Adrenalize was number 4. Um, like you said, Let's Get Rocked. Obviously, that's the song that is my what I feel is the best one on that album. And the deep cut I'm gonna go with is I Want to Touch You. Just love the production of that song, and it's a fun song. It's nothing. Considering like you said all the stuff they went through, it's just a fun song which I really like. And Adrenalize, it reached number 1. And it really didn't have even a top 10 song on it. So to reach number 1 at that point in time, like you said, with everything that was going on in the music scene, that's actually pretty amazing. And it did make triple platinum, which is even more amazing that was probably the last time a hair band sold that many copies, I believe.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember anybody else selling that many.
No, Firehouse had some big singles, of course with their ballads, but no album sold like that. That was the last of them. And
Yeah.
I apologize, I didn't give you my deep cut, but I would pick Tear It Down. Tear It Down
Ah,
with the leftover from the Hysteria sessions. And, I mentioned Adrenalize was kind of Hysteria light. If you go back and listen to Tear It Down from the Hysteria sessions, I actually prefer that version, right? It's a little meaner, a little rougher. Everything got this real shiny pop gloss sheen on it on Adrenalize, and it kind of took the teeth out of songs like Tear It Down. I mean, I still love the Adrenalize version, but I always thought that was a gem on the record.
yeah, definitely. That's, I mean, there's, I only just picked one deep cut. I mean, I probably could have picked four, you know what I'm saying? So, all right, so that was going back with that was my number four. You did number five, so I guess we're gonna go hit your number four now.
Okay, my number four was Slang. We actually hit that. Again, that was my crazy point.
Okay. So my number five, I think, yeah, I didn't get my number five in yet. I didn't mention this when you mentioned your number 10, I believe it was. On Through the Night
Oh,
was number five for me. Yeah, I didn't know how we were gonna do it, so so we're gonna do it now. On Through the Night for me. Um, I wasn't a real big fan of this album when it first came out, for whatever reason. I really didn't even know Def Leppard obviously until Pyromania actually came out, and then obviously I went
not
back,
alone.
found this album, and that's when I started getting into it. Rock Brigade, obviously that's one that was the one that pretty much got it on the radio, so that's the song that, for me is the best. The Deep Cut, which I just kind of recently discovered, I like Overture. Long
Oh yeah.
song, but man, what a that they seem to start finally that compared to a lot of the other songs on the album, that one kind of stands out for me there compared to against all the other ones. Definitely stands out. Definitely a decent, real decent song there. So on through the night, that ended up going platinum after years. I don't know when it actually got certified, but I know obviously it wasn't one of those ones where it came out and was certified within a year or anything like that. I guess down the road, people discovered it, and that's when it finally became platinum. Only reached number 51 on the charts, but you got to remember at that time, no one really knew who they were. They were brand new to the scene.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, I first of all, let me just I appreciate you not hanging up on me when I introduced that as my number 10 album.
Yeah, not a problem there. So let's see, where are we at now?
I
You
think we
already.
both got our top three left. And I think we've both got the same, maybe not the same order, but we got the same three albums in the top three.
All right, give me your number three. Let's see what we got here.
Okay, I went with High and Dry.
All
And
right.
again, I really could have done these and I went back and forth, right? I mean, High and Dry, it's hard to say it's not their best album. I mean, it's one of the best hard rock albums by any band, I think.
Yeah.
We talked about. I had felt there was kind of a lack of focus on a raw, potential thing on through the night. But I mean, that was definitely remedied by the time they got with Mutt Lang on High and Dry. He had just finished Back in Black, and at this point, Def Leppard was still heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal rock band. Joe Elliott still had screams, and they still had AC/DC riffs all over the place. And outside of Bringing on the Heartbreak, which is a great song, I mean, every other song was it was a scorcher. The focus, it was just a laser beam focus in terms of what they wanted to achieve. They had all these riffs, but of course, I think you also have to remember that the Def Leppard that most people knew, which was Hysteria, and the Def Leppard on High and Dry, two different guitar players, so or at least the two different guitar players versus some of their later works. So it's going to be a different beast. But a song like Let It Go, I mean, even in 1983, that was just a huge rock anthem, right? They still play that in concert, still sounds fantastic.
Yep.
So, I mean, I was a big fan of High and Dry, still am. It holds up, right? Some albums age better than others. I think you can pick High and Dry out in any year, and it's always going to sound fantastic. I think for those looking for it, there's a 2021 remaster of this album that I thought really, I mean, the sound was always good, but I thought really added a little more thump and bass to the record. If you're a fan of the album and you haven't picked up that remaster, you'll be happy if you hunt it down, I promise.
Yeah. High and Dry is my number three as well. The album, that was the first real chart success here. It reached number 38. Surprisingly, it's only been certified double platinum. I would assume they probably sold more by now. It's probably one of those ones that hasn't been certified in quite some time, my guess would be. But that is the album that put them on the map really as far as and then they built it up from there. Um, so for me, like you said, Let It Go, it just doesn't get any better than that. That's probably in my top three Def Leppard songs of all time by a mile there. And for a deep cut, you could pick pretty much anything else. I picked Mirror Mirror, Look Into My Eyes. Just love that song. But I could have very well picked anything from the album. There's so many other, fantastic songs on the album that even though didn't get airplay, they still would play like another hit and run a lot. You'd see that one in concert every now and then, which is great. I actually saw it on the Slang tour, oddly enough. And then Bringing On the Heartbreak obviously was the main radio song that got him the exposure like you had mentioned. But On Through the Night, the song, You Got Me Running, Lady Strange, I could go on. There's so much good stuff on here.
Yeah, it's a great album. It was really it set them up for everything they would achieve later on, even if they were going to, eventually move away from that sound, and into more of the commercialized pop sound that they chose. But anybody looking for a good early 80s hard rock album could do a lot worse than High and Dry.
That's for sure. All right, let's see how we rank on number two here. What do you got?
Okay, so this is an impossible choice. Right? I mean, this is not fair. Like I said, these worst to first list, they're least favorite to most favorite. They're easier for some band than others. I don't think there's a wrong choice here. I mean, people would argue with me on that. The true Def Leppard fan, there's probably only going to be one choice here, and I'm going to choose wrong. Uh, I put Pyromania as my number two. And this, may be just a sign of the age, when you came of rock and roll age, for example. I was discussing Motley Crue with someone the other day, and if you were 16 in 1983, then Shout at the Devil is Motley Crue's best album. If you were 16 in 1989, then maybe Dr. Feelgood is Motley Crue's best album. By the way, it's Shout at the Devil objectively now. So I mean, it just depends on when you were really cutting your teeth on this music in your teenage years. But for people that were there, and were into music at the time, I mean, Pyromania is probably, and of course, a lot of people argue that Hysteria is when they moved away from what people loved about the band. And again, they're not wrong. But Hysteria is just going to hold a special place for me, and we'll get to that. But Pyromania is just an amazing record. It was the crucial third album. Pete Willis was fired, Phil Collin came on, as opposed to their first couple of records. It took them 10 months to make this thing, which was a ridiculously long time for a band that now little did they know when it came time to make an Hysteria, it was going to be a whole nother story. But 10 months was, forever. But they accomplished what they set out to do, right? The AC/DC riffs were complemented with streamlined songs. Everything was polished from a more precise, slightly colder production. And there were more hooks. There were hooks everywhere. It was a more commercial type of thing, and that's what they were going for. Rock Till You Drop could have easily fit on High and Dry, but you can tell right away it spent more time at the polishing factory. And of course, it was living off the big three, right? It lived off Photograph and Foolin' and Rock of Ages. And Photograph was, I thought, really a good example of, again, I don't consider Def Leppard hair metal, but when you think about what hair metal was and what it was cutting its teeth on and evolving to be, it was essentially heavy metal with melodies and heavy metal with hooks. So it was more accessible to the average member of the audience, right? Especially the females. And this was Photograph, right? Sure, there's a great riff, but there's vocal melodies, there's harmonies that Def Leppard would come to be known by, there's keyboards, and there's all the Mutt Lange treatment you can muster in terms of making a commercial hit. And what do you know? The song went to number 1 in the United States, check the box. So the album had huge broad appeal. I mean, what did it sell? Like 10 million copies or something, and launched them into the stratosphere. But there's no skippable songs on this album, right? You can listen to it, at least I can, just front to back, and ready to turn it over again. Just an amazing record. So sorry, I rambled on that, but the album deserves it.
Oh yeah, when we get down to these last couple albums, you're definitely going to be a lot to talk about, especially when they're as strong as these albums are. All right, so Pyromania for me actually was my top choice, but we'll carry on with this choice here. Obviously the album itself reached number two. It was their first diamond album, 10 times platinum. And Photograph was the song that basically put the album on the map. And, to this day, they always pretty much end the show with Photograph. That's usually the song that usually, for me, that's the one that got me into the band. That's when I first started listening to them. That's when I first knew of them. And so for me, I'm glad I was around right in that era there to have that happen. So obviously Photograph is the song for me for the Matt album. Deep Cut, another like you said, there was a lot of singles from this album, but as far as a deep cut that wasn't a single, I'm gonna go with Stage Fright. It's a song that opened up the Hysteria
Yep.
tour. They haven't really played it a heck of a lot over the years as much as you would think for such a great song. I mean, that's a great concert opener right there. Just love that song. There's a lot of other ones on the album I could have picked, but I went with that one. Rock Rock Till You Drop. I've seen them play that one live a lot. And they always play the big ones in concert from this album. They never skip. Rock of Ages. They never skip. You know, Photograph and any of the other ones that were the singles. You never see them skip that. Foolin'. Too Late for Love is one I remember seeing a couple tours where they didn't do that one. And then every time they bring it back for the next tour, man, people are just into that one so much. So it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. When you got a catalog that big, it must be really hard to make a set list for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was my number one, and then so obviously that's going to take us to your top choice here.
Yeah, so again, to a lot of Def Leppard fans that we're big fans of the first three albums, so I've chosen wrong here, but I chose Hysteria, and I'm not trying to sell out or anything, but this was right about the time when I was most into the genre and into the music, really discovering. And of course, I went back and found High and Dry and Pyromania, but Hysteria, it's even though most people say, hey, this was the band's sellout album. Some people say this. I mean, it was an intentional move, right? Yes, they got away from the new wave of British heavy metal, but I don't think you can ignore the fact that any way you slice it, this is an objectively, just an amazing piece of work. The fact that this album even got on the shelves at all, I think, is nothing short of a miracle, considering what they went through. How long
Yeah.
did it take to make? Several years to make. Uh, you know, they went through a number of different producers until they finally found Mutt Lange again. Rick Allen lost his arm, for heaven's sakes, right? The band persevered; it paid off. But everybody knows the story behind Hysteria, right? They wanted to make, as I'm sure you've heard, they wanted to make pop metal or heavy metal's version of Michael Jackson's Thriller, right? An album that had 7 hit singles and all of them sounded different, and they did it, right? They absolutely did it. The production on the album at the time, it was probably beyond any of its peers, right? And again, some people say that's a downfall. I say it's overproduced. I guess it just depends on your personal preference. But the production on that album became the template for a lot of albums after that in the genre, for sure. I mean, even to this day, you can pop that in, and 30 years later, it's an amazing job on the production side. And it really did yield 7 hit singles, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can count them off. It could have yielded 8 or 9, perhaps. People always talk about Gods of War or Love and Affection. These easily could have been big selling signals. No skippable songs for me, really. So again, I know some critics mourn the death of the Def Leppard, who was based on the new wave of British heavy metal, but they did what they were aiming for. They put out one of the biggest commercially selling albums of all time, and it was the perfect sweet spot at the time. What did it sell? 25 million albums, I think. That number stuck in my head, and maybe even more now. But I thought it was amazing. So, what about you?
Well, obviously number two for me because I had Pyromania at one. Like I said, first number one album. Another diamond album in the States, and so many, was it 25 million worldwide, you said?
I think so. Yeah.
Crazy, man, crazy. It's like anybody who liked music had a copy of this one somewhere,
Oh yeah.
whether it was on, well, at the time, I guess it would have been on cassette or album, but, 'cause CDs pretty much came a little after that. But, it was, yeah, first song I ever heard off of this album was Woman on the radio, and that one right away. As soon as I heard that song, I was hooked. I went out and bought the album, and from there it was all Hysteria, and
You
great
were one
song.
of the rare ones, right? I mean, Women was kind of a crazy choice for the first single. This album had multiple singles before it hit so much later with Pour Some Sugar on Me. I mean, it was what, at least 10 months percolating before this thing hit, because I'm not sure they went with the best single out of the gate.
Right, yeah, and that was one of the things too. I was always surprised that Pour Some Sugar on Me was not a single sooner, because it was screaming single. Once I got the album home and listened to it, you're going, why isn't this why isn't this thing been released as a single? And obviously, as soon as it was, it finally got, everybody was able to see, what it was all about. But obviously, I believe it only reached number two though. What was the song that knocked it off that wouldn't allow it to beat? Do you remember offhand?
Oh, I have that song in the book, but I'm embarrassed. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think I had that in the book, though. I might have to go back and read my own writing.
Oh, Richard Marx, Hold On to the Nights.
Was that it? Yep.
Man, that's lame.
Well, I mean, people know probably, Pour Some Sugar on Me was the last song written for the album, right? They were done. They were packed up. They went home, and Joe Elliott was just finishing up some vocals with Mutt, and he was kind of strumming this on his guitar while Mutt went to the restroom, and he comes back and says, "Hey, I think you got something there, right?" He thought it had the potential to be a big crossover hit. This was kind of a merging. We don't think anything of it now, but at the time, it was kind of mixing these rap like verses with rock music. There wasn't a lot of that back at the time. It's kind of unique, but I think actually the first time it got played was as a B-side by some radio station, almost by accident. And then they said, "Hey, this is going to be the signal." Of course, people went back and discovered Animal, went back and discovered Women, and it blew the record up. But it took a long time. These, in hindsight, people don't remember, but albums like Hysteria and Appetite for Destruction, these things were not giant hits right out of the gate. They took a
Right.
long time to simmer before they finally broke. It's kind of unique. You don't see that these days.
Yeah, and if you look at it, the way this album was released, you released Animal was actually the first single released, but I
In the
remember hearing,
UK.
for some reason, I remember hearing Women on the radio first here, so I don't know, maybe that's the why, because they had it UK first. Okay.
Yeah, they had it in UK first with Animal there, which is probably the right choice. But
Uh-huh.
in the US, the record company fought for Women, even though the band wanted Animal, because they wanted to kind of transition the audience from Pyromania. And they
Hmm.
thought Animal was a little too poppy, which maybe it was. And they thought Woman was a better tie to the more, brooding rock sounds of Pyromania. So that was the record company's grand decision. Didn't exactly work out, but that's why they did it differently in the US.
Yeah, so the one thing I could say, I have to say it. I'm sorry, but Pour Some Sugar on Me. It's one of those songs that it seems like that's the only Def Leppard song our radio station plays here, and so it's one of those songs that I would love not to see it one of these days live even. I can do without it. I've heard it more than enough times. I like it, but it's been overplayed by a country mile and then some.
Oh yeah, I mean certainly some songs get overplayed, and that's why we have an appreciation for these deep cuts. And I apologize, I haven't been remembering to give you one each time, but I'll give you one for this album.
All
And it's
right.
tough to pick a deep cut, right? Because everything was a single almost. But I always liked Run Riot. That was not
Yep.
going to. It just had, it was fast, it was up tempo, and it's kind of interesting, right? The non-signal singles off Hysteria, songs like "Don't Shoot Shotgun" or "Love and Affection" or "Run Riot" or "Gods of War." These would have been the best songs on anybody else's album at the time. So it just goes to show you how strong a record it really was. But again, there's no, I mean, I think Excitable is probably the weakest song on the record. That's just my personal opinion. But
Oh
other than
yeah,
that,
I
there's nothing.
agree. Yeah, I Women was the one I picked as the best, and Gods of War was my deep cut. So for that one there, so we're pretty much, you mentioned that one a couple times there. So yeah, excitable, that, and actually Don't Shoot Shotgun is probably the second least favorite for me.
Yeah, it's a little more generic than the other songs.
Just because, if you look at see what other songs it's going against, and another thing that people probably, hard to believe, a lot of people don't realize that Def Leppard's had one number one song, and that was "Love Bites," which
Yep.
you would have thought for sure "Pour Some Sugar on Me" would be a number one song for as often as you hear it and see it and everything else. It's just odd that that song came out of nowhere and ended up being number one.
Yeah, hey, that goes back to that other book I told you I was writing as the follow-up. Again, a power ballad is the biggest hit for this rock band. Yeah, I think Mutt brought that song in. It's almost an acoustic number, and of course they leopardized it, but it wasn't the standard power ballad format at the time. It was kind of unique in the way it was structured. Of course, it was all over MTV. You couldn't get away from it on MTV. You couldn't get away from Def Leppard on MTV for that matter.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. It took a while. That was another one that was released late. But obviously sometimes the strategy was, if the band was good enough, you're going to sell a certain number of copies coming off of Pyromania. So they were probably already shipping platinum at that point already. So it didn't really matter what they released as long as they can keep it on the charts for a long period of time. That was actually something maybe in hindsight, maybe that's what they did on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're going to sell albums off the back of Pyromania, but there were two things going for Hysteria that made the stakes higher, right? I mean, one, they had waited so long, not through their fault, but
Right.
the public forgets about you, right? And it had been years since Pyromania, and not only that, I mean, the cost that went into making Hysteria, right? I mean, they had to sell 20 million copies of this just to recoup the costs. So if this was just your average 5 million album seller, they were going to be in the red.
That's a good way of looking at it, that's for sure, especially back then in
Yep.
that point in time. All right, well, that takes care of our ranking here. Did you want to add anything else about Def Leppard before we conclude here?
No, hey, it's a lot of fun. Again, if you can forgive me for my positioning of On Through the Night and Slang, then I'll say thank you. I think for the most part, we were in lockstep, but I've never, like I said, I've done a lot of these on a lot of shows, and I've never done Def Leppard, and it was unique because again, I don't think they have a bad album, where some do, and so it just goes to show the consistency of their catalog and just a high quality artist for sure.
Right, definitely. All right, sounds good. I appreciate your time this, and we'll have to do it again soon with some other bands here.
All right, Joe. Hey, good to speak with you. I look forward to it. Thank you, sir.